Saliki inetus ni shamapa manateo iwe ni San Luis iutupukune esalahan pa mistaka maliahapa hilapa tayue pa nomoes. Good morning. My name is Amanda Teo. I am the Grants Manager at Native Americans in Philanthropy. I am located on the unceded territories of the Osage in what is colonially referred to as St. Louis, Missouri. I am Esalen. My traditional lands span the colonized areas of Monterey and Big Sur, and Mixteca on the lands colonially known as Oaxaca. Much gratitude, honor, and blessings to you all. This is our first time convening since a very successful NAPCon 2024. We were delighted to see so many of you in Minneapolis and extend continuous thanks to our sponsors and our local advisory committee for making the event possible. You all may remember a key theme of our conference was the powerful inclusion of the next generation of leaders. These young leaders are the driving force behind our movement. They are as fierce as they are wise. Continuing our commitment to empowering our youth, we here at NAP extend a very special welcome to Ruby King, a member of our Native Youth Grantmaker program, who you all will have the opportunity to meet later on. We hope your organizations will join us as we decenter our own internal hierarchies and recenter reciprocity, respect, and care for our youth. Today's session will begin to dive into what our resistance and liberation looks like through a lens of mental health. It is crucial that we prioritize our mental health, especially as Indigenous people. The stark disparities faced by Indigenous communities are undeniable. Generations of trauma inflicted by displacement, incarceration, and systems of oppression have intentionally shattered our communities, leaving deep wounds and systematic injustices in their wake. It is time to reclaim our connection and our worth. It is time to dismantle the cycles of trauma and reject the oppressive conditioning forced upon us. I refer to mental health in most capacities as healing. It is a passion of mine, or maybe it's more of a necessity. I have 9 children, and I believe in the depths of who I am that in order for them to be well, I must also be well. I refer to mental health as healing because I understand myself to be an unhealed and colonized byproduct of a very functioning system. And I also understand myself to be healing, unlearning, relearning, and remembering the practices that are and will continue to reconnect me to myself, my ancestors, and Creator. Mental health does not mean that we are broken. In fact, we are all inherently worthy and whole beings solely because we exist. Caring for our mental health is reclamation, rematriation. It is returning to ourselves. It is returning to our ancestors and returning to the land. It is asserting our dignity, demanding equitable access to resources, and breaking free from survival mode to fully embrace our whole selves in every space we inhabit. So let's get this conversation going. I'm going to pass it off to our friend and moderator, Steph Poston, who will introduce herself and our guest speakers.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing that heartfelt definition of wellness and your expression of that. So thank you so much for that. Welcome to NAP TV, everybody. I'm Steph Poston. I'm from the Pueblo of Sandia, just north of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I want to publicly congratulate NAP on a successful and impactful gathering in April of 2024. What NAPCon is what they're calling it. From what I've seen, the event continues to grow and make huge impacts. So congratulations and continued success. That space is necessary for us to do this work. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. It is so important that we start to normalize asking for help. As a former health, safety, and education director for my tribe, that was one of the things that I wish that we had really put front and center, that you don't have to be on fire to ask for that support and help, to just get a third perspective on how things are going in your life, whether it's raising children, running a business, and just how to multitask and balance all of life challenges. So making that effort to ask for help and really normalizing that in our tribal communities. In my own healing journey, it was important that I access counseling services at my own tribal healthcare facility, health clinic. And so that has been truly helpful and has made such a huge impact in so many positive ways in my own life. I currently work with the state of New Mexico on the 988 outreach and marketing. It's the national crisis lifeline that is out there for anybody to call. You can be anywhere in the United States and call 988 for that support. So I just want to make sure that folks know that that's available. So we've got a very special panel with us today. Panelists, as you're called, please introduce yourself and your affiliation to our audience, however you feel comfortable in sharing. In closing, though, I just ask if you could also give a few moments to center us in today's topic by sharing your definition of what wellness is and how you conceptualize it in your work. But first of all, I will bring up Ruby.
Ayuki, everybody. My name is Ruby King. I'm from the Karuk and Yurok tribes in Northern California. I currently reside on unceded Ohlone territory in Berkeley, California. I am going into my senior year of my undergrad, where I am double majoring in psychology and Native American study. Well-being to me, and how I kind of conceptualize that in my work, is tying cultural revitalization and involvement into practices that can be used to mitigate, like substance abuse issues or different mental health things in my community. I am actually working on a scholars program, and I'm going to tie that into my honors thesis, where I'll be looking at the colonial impacts of fire suppression and how my community has used the return of cultural prescribed burning as a form of healing medicine. And I'm grateful to be here and sharing space with everybody.
Thanks so much, Ruby, who is one of our Native Youth Grant makers. It's always great to have your perspective on things, so thank you very much. I'd like to next invite up Autumn.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm Autumn Asher BlackDeer. I'm a member of the Southern Cheyenne Nation. We're currently out in Western Oklahoma, but I'm actually here on our traditional homelands in Denver, Colorado, along with the Arapaho and Ute Nations. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Social Work, but I also more identify as like a decolonial scholar activist. So, we know that navigating colonial institutions really wears on our mental health and well-being. And so for me, whenever I think about wellness and well-being, it's really that kind of reclamation of like Indigenous mental health, and kind of thinking about the stark contrast when we think about like a pathologizing Western mental health versus like Indigenous mental health just inherently feels like strengths-based and like culturally based, and reclaiming our traditions. So I think I try to almost reclaim the idea of mental health from the like clutches of Western colonialism, and kind of say that we're doing what we know has been working for our communities since time began. And so we've always had the solutions, and so just trying to uplift that in whatever I do. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. BlackDeer. Appreciate that. Monique?
Greetings, everyone. Monique Castro here. I am a citizen of the Navajo Nation, or Diné, and Xicana, born and raised on Tongva territory, so Los Angeles. And I am a mom, I'm a wife, I'm an auntie, a cousin to many. And also in my professional role, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and the CEO and founder of Indigenous Circle of Wellness, which is a psychotherapy practice here in California. We have 2 locations in the Southern California region. And wellness to me is being in balance and harmony with oneself, inclusive of our emotions, our body, our spirit, and mind. And that we have the ability to thrive and be a good relative to all creation. So thank you for having me.
I love that part about being a good relative and supporting people in that space. Glenna?
Hatso Goihini Akan Deonde. Hi, my name is Glenna Stumblingbear-Riddle. I'm Kiowa and in Oklahoma. I'm a psychologist. I have my own business called Resilient Tribal Roots. It's a private practice, and I also contract with the Suicide Prevention Resource Center and help with their 988 program, and also contract with the Oklahoma Heart Hospital and provide on-call care. So professionally, I'm a psychologist, very proud of the work that I get to do. Personally, my favorite role is being a mother. I have a daughter that I'm crazy about, and I just really love my family, and they're very important to me. But my absolute favorite thing of all the things I get to do is being a mom. Wellness to me, some other people have shared some good definitions, but I think about, just taking care of our spirit, and it's a daily practice. And so we got to be working on it, every day to find that balance. It's not like a check box, like, hey, I did that for the week, I'm done. It's really important that we do that every day. And I think about it like, taking care of yourself, your spirit, so you can best show up for everyone around you. Because, being an Indigenous person, the collective is very important. My family, my community is very important. And so if I'm able to have good wellness for myself, then I can extend that to my relatives and be a good relative. And I'm just so thankful to be here today with you all. I thank Creator for allowing me this time and space. And thanks again for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to this presentation.
Awesome. Thank you all for those introductions. We truly do have a powerful panel of folks who are working in Indian country on this very, very essential topic and need for our communities to heal and just show up better as our relatives in our community. So I'm going to continue on with Glenna. I'm going to ask the first question. Please share your journey into the practice or study of mental health and wellness and why you chose to prioritize it.
Okay. Well, interestingly enough, I'm going to tell a little story because I think it might be helpful to some people. When I was in high school, my aunt worked for the Department of the Interior up in DC. And so I was really fortunate that I got to go visit her. And at the time, I thought that I might be an attorney, maybe one day a judge. I have a very strong sense of justice. So anyways, I got to go be with her. And so I got to go to her work environment and actually got to visit with a number of attorneys. And I've always kind of had a sense of picking up on, people's emotions pretty easily and connecting with people. And just kind of from my time there, talking with them, they all seemed super stressed out. And so I just kind of started thinking, I don't know if this is for me. Maybe I should think about something else. And so, go back home in Anadarko, which is where I'm originally from. And then we had some speakers come in that were, talking about the need for more Indigenous people in healthcare. And so I started thinking about that. And there were some parts of healthcare that I just really didn't think would be a great fit. But, I've always been really fascinated with human behavior. And so I started looking into psychology. Decided to pursue psychology at an undergraduate level. And I really, I was a first generation college student. So I didn't really know where that was going to take me. But fortunately enough, I actually got to meet a native psychologist during my undergraduate years. And that was really like the first time I saw myself represented in that kind of role. And so I started thinking, this person's doing amazing work with tribes. And I kind of got the idea that, hey, maybe I could do that too. And so that's when I decided to go to graduate school and to become a psychologist. And so that's kind of that's kind of like how my journey kind of came around to that. And then I would say being a psychologist, it's a very rewarding career. It can also be challenging, especially in the pandemic. And so right before the pandemic, that's when I, started my own private practice. But I would say I've really prioritized my own mental health in the last few years just because of the pandemic and all the lessons learned there. And so, yeah, that's pretty much my journey in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you. Autumn, same question about your journey into the practice of mental health and wellness.
Well, I actually went to college to be a journalist major. Like I was like, I'm going to read the news. I'm going to be on TV. And I did a year of that in undergrad. And then I went home, and my mom actually worked as an administrative assistant at an inpatient psychiatric facility. And they were like hiring for the summer. And so I was like, okay, cool. I'll just hang out and do this for the summer. And I really just fell in love with mental health. I worked with a lot of youth and adolescents who were experiencing behavioral health issues. And so the summer program was kind of like a space for them to, practice coping skills and have that sort of supportive environment while they were kind of on break from school. And so it was really transformative for me to see that there was a lot of like punitive measures instead of like really supporting youth that were experiencing issues. It was like, you're going to lose consequences, you're going to, lose privileges and all these sorts of things. So I met with our clinical director at the time, and she had her LCSW. She's a licensed clinical social worker. And I was like, I want to do what you do. Like, I think it's really cool that you're like coordinating all of these things. And so I went back to school. We didn't have a bachelor's of social work program. So I did my undergrad in psychology and then went on to grad school to get my master's of social work. But actually, when I was working on my master's, I had my first like Indigenous mentor ever, like first ever Indigenous professor or teacher. And that was really transformative to me to be able to work with Dr. Lisa Byers. She's at the University of Oklahoma. And she's Cherokee, and she's just so like welcoming and like supportive. And I remember we had to like write, a social justice paper on any issue that we wanted to. And I wrote about sexual violence against Indigenous women. And she wrote on my paper, like, have you ever considered getting a PhD? And I was like, oh yeah, like eventually, but I didn't think it would be this soon. But as I like went through the program, I was learning more and more, about injustices against Indigenous communities. And I was like, we have to do something about this, right? Like I cannot just like be doing like one-on-one clinical like interventions whenever I'm trying to like make these connections about these broader systems of oppression. And so I feel like that's kind of been, so I ended up going to straight through from grad school to get my PhD. And I actually ended up going to the same school where Dr. Byers got her PhD from. And she was actually the first Indigenous woman to get her PhD in social work from Washington University in St. Louis. So it's kind of like, always thinking about, I just love being in community with folks that are like thinking about being a good relative, because I'm like, I am only here because of folks looking out for me and being that mentor for me. And that has such a huge impact on mental health and wellness, right? About like being those support spaces in these sort of really harmful institutions and kind of organizations. So I think I really got here from, supportive people that were like, you could do this, you can, this is another aspect of how you can address things. So I originally saw my path as like being, you know, a therapist or a mental health services provider. But I think now, like, as a researcher and as a person in, you know, in the ivory tower, I feel like I'm able to make these sort of larger interventions, like to speak to folks that are writing the curriculum that will then influence practitioners, the future practitioners, to say, like, stop writing from a pathologizing lens and write from this holistic perspective about healing. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, wow. I think I'm hearing a theme about the importance of mentorship. So thank you for sharing that. Monique, what about your journey?
Yeah, so my journey, I'd say there's so many threads to it, different like kind of parts of my life. But as far as like undergrad and going into the field of psychology, I actually didn't know what psychology was till my sophomore year in college. So just a little bit of a backstory is I'm a first generation high school graduate and therefore going into college and directly into a 4-year university. So I was very unfamiliar with the education system, like as far as higher education majors, any of that. So I entered undergrad as a criminal justice major because that was one of a very few majors that I was familiar with. So I took some different undergrad classes, and then there was this moment when I had my first psychology class, Psychology 101, and I will tell you that I've never felt this way before. It was like this is it. This is the one kind of feeling. I loved everything about it. I knew that this was the major I wanted to go into and I needed to change it immediately. And that's what I did. So I, continued my undergrad and I ended up changing my major to psychology. And it wasn't until probably my junior year in my undergrad program then that I thought about graduate school. Again, being first generation, I had no idea what is graduate school. I just thought my next step was undergrad. I'm going to get this degree and I carry on. But then I was approached by a professor who said, have you considered going to graduate school? And I'm like, what is that? And I didn't think it was for me. And she pretty much gave me the tools and the information to continue on my education. She invited me into a multicultural psychology research team. And from that point, I just kind of got more into the research aspect of things, presented at APA as an undergrad. So there was a lot of things from that point that started opening my mind around like what I can do in the field of psychology beyond my bachelor's degree. And I didn't quite decide at that time if I was going to be a therapist. Again, I did not know that there's this field of therapy and I can be a therapist and what it was called. So I started working within the community. I worked for a local here in Los Angeles, a tribal organization, and I was a case manager. And in that experience is when I had my next aha moment around like, I'm only able to provide so much support as a case manager. More is needed. What can I do to kind of fill this gap? And then I started to get introduced to what a therapist would do, and really working on the healing aspect of the community that I'm from and that I'm working with. So then it was after a year post undergrad, I decided to go to grad school and started my graduate studies as in marriage and family therapy. So everything for me was very new. I did have some mentors along the way, but it was, I think, like once I was already in it, I'm like, oh, I probably should talk to someone about this field in this area. So I think now today, I really have a strong passion in supporting like emerging therapists and letting them know ahead of time a lot of the information and the steps that it takes. Because also I didn't realize how long it takes to get licensed, to be a licensed therapist. So that was a whole journey in itself. I do love this career. I love everything that I do. I'm so glad that I took this journey. But I also wish I would have known more ahead of time. But nonetheless, that was kind of like the entry point in that. But I think what also really was the driving force in all of my schooling was that I was also rediscovering or discovering myself and also my family lineage and why there was so much turmoil. Why was there so much chaos? Why did my parents struggle with addiction? Why was my mother incarcerated? What were the things that impacted them, or what happened, right? So through psychology, not only was I learning in the field, I was learning a lot about my family, myself, and my community. And so it was it's been a very not only do I get to provide so much healing and support to others, but it's been such a healing journey for myself and my family. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I've watched a little bit of your journey on social media, and so congratulations on starting your own business that supports these efforts. And I can relate to the whole thing of being new to college and what a lot of people take for granted. What I didn't know was really important, and to be able to share that. So thank you for that. So the next question is, can you speak to the pressures and stigma surrounding mental health in communities of color? Where do these come from? And I'll start with Autumn.
I think the biggest thing is that there's a lot of like shame around speaking about mental health. And so that, of course, is from colonialism, right? We were, taught to, fragment ourselves and fragment our spirits from, being in community with one another. And so I think the biggest pressure is that it's, we're very tight-knit communities. And so there's kind of this pressure to not share what's really going on. Or, I remember, I was a youth struggling with self-harm, and I told my mom, and she was like, I never want to hear you say that again. And I was like, okay, like that was not helpful, And so thinking about, how can we normalize this for fellow folks to say, like, I've struggled with this as well. I've struggled with self-harm. I've struggled with depression and anxiety, trauma. And so this is how I healed from it. And really normalizing those, conversations, I think, is so important.
Thank you. Glenna, can you speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, I think shame again has a lot to do with it. I think there's also, just misinformation out there. What I experience a lot when seeing people is, they contemplated coming to therapy for, a long time. And it took them a while to finally get into the door. And, a common thing that a lot of people will talk about is, well, I thought I had to be like really bad off to come to therapy. Or, I thought I had to be, their words, but like crazy to come to therapy. And, it's like, well, no, I'm a believer that all of us would benefit from some form of therapy, no matter, what our issues are, because we all have issues. We all have struggles and things that we have to work through. So I think a lot of it is just, misinformation, or, sometimes it can be scary. Sometimes things that are like shown in the media aren't always accurate. So again, people don't exactly know, what it really looks like. I also think, that there are some families and maybe some communities, some systems that don't necessarily promote therapy and make it hard. I live in Oklahoma, which, is in the Bible Belt. And I still see a lot of people that struggle coming to therapy because of their religion, or maybe people at their church. I've been told by people, that the psychology is evil. The work that I'm doing is evil. And so it's like, I mean, wow, that's a lot to deal with right there. So I think there's a lot of reasons why there's so much stigma, and why, it's really hard. And I think especially in Indigenous communities, there's just layers upon layers upon layers that make it really challenging. And so one thing that I think can really help, in my experience, what I've noticed is that when somebody has went through therapy themselves, especially in Indigenous communities, and they're able to share that with someone, like a family member or a friend, like, hey, I wasn't so sure about therapy, but, I gave it a whirl, and hey, it really helped me. I think that really does help us to have some trust, and, maybe get over some of that fear and have some courage, despite the stigmas that exist. And it just kind of normalizes that, like, hey, this is a good thing to do, that it's been helpful. But yeah, I think, it all kind of goes back to a lot of shame, a lot of misinformation, and then there's a whole lot of systems out there still today that unfortunately are not very supportive of mental health.
Yeah. When I read that question, I was thinking when I first started accessing behavioral health services at the Pueblo of Sandia Tribal Clinic, and the therapist asked me, if you want, that you can come through the back door, that makes you feel more comfortable. I was like, I think I took a hard swallow, and I said, no, come get me. I want people to see you come get me, that it's okay, like that it's okay to go ask for help. And so it took a minute. It felt a little funny, a little vulnerable, but hopefully that helped somebody else, is what I was hoping for. So Monique, same question, like what is those stigmas for us?
Yeah, definitely what has already been shared. Shame is a big one that comes up a lot. Also, I would say there's a level of denial and grief that is also experienced by folks. One, it can be the denial around that you may need the support for your mental health, and what does that mean, right? It could be like, no, I can do these things, like they work, or I can just talk to my friends. I can just pray harder and this will all go away and get better. I'm just not believing hard enough. And that's not true. So there is a level of like denial and also grief and fear. There's a lot of fear that I think comes up as well. As like, what does this mean? And this comes a lot from misinformation, things that we see in the media. We see these very kind of extreme situations which do occur and happen, but it's not necessarily the experience like maybe folks might be experiencing. So it gets us scared. Well, if I have this diagnosis, or if I am noticing these challenges, I'm having these thoughts, this means this is going to happen, right? And I can give a personal experience for myself, because I very much was in that kind of denial and grief as well in my postpartum. So after I had my son, I had a very traumatic birth experience, and I developed postpartum anxiety and depression. And I thought when I got that diagnosis from my doctor that like my mind went to, oh my gosh, I'm going to harm my child. Like this means that I'm going to hurt my child. And never was that actually the case. Never did I even think that. That wasn't one of the things, but it was a constant fear around it as soon as the diagnosis was provided. But really what I had to come to terms with and really face is that, no, my brain is needing more time to adjust. I had a traumatic experience. This is what is my way of my brain. And again, I had to like really talk myself through this, being a therapist, right? Like being a mental health provider, and like my brain is doing what it needs to do for survival right now. And it's trying to survive. And therefore it's going to be really hyper vigilant. It's going to, I'm not going to be able to do the things I was able to do before for a while, right? There was this need and this constant need for healing and support. But to share that with family and friends, it got them scared. So it's the fear I had for myself and then the fear they had for me. And so it makes it really difficult to have the conversations. I'm like, no, I'm getting the support. I have a postpartum perinatal therapist specialist. I am seeing a psychiatrist, so I have all the supports in place to help ease their anxiety around like what is possible, like, oh my goodness, like what's going to happen. So I think there's a lot that comes with it, both for the person that's experiencing it, as well as like family and close friends, and like how uncomfortable that can be. And, I had to take about a really good solid year and a half in my postpartum to really focus on my healing and wellness. And I'm in a much better place, actually even a better place than I was before I was ever pregnant, because I've taken my mental health so seriously. And as I move forward and navigate life, moving forward, I'm like, I have better tools, right? This experience, and it also has afforded me the ability to be even more a better therapist to others, and to support, birthing folks who are experiencing postpartum, as well as the family unit. What does this mean, right? So I'm realizing I'm starting to navigate a different area of focus in this experience for myself. But in that, I've always seen the shame and guilt and fear that can come up from my clients, but then I experienced it myself. And you do have this kind of like experiential inner dialogue around, like, how is this happening to me? Like, I have all the tools, I know all the things. Like, you know I couldn't do therapy on myself to figure it out. And that's the thing, is that with mental health, just like if we have any other diagnosis or challenge, right? Physically, if I have high blood pressure, right? Like, I need to get that treated in a certain kind of way. There's certain steps that I need, and mental health, I think, still is one of those areas where it's getting better. People are talking about it, but it's still very much uncomfortable. And I think that definitely comes from fear and grief of, what does this mean? But we need to continue to talk about it, to share our stories and ways in which we're getting support, so then others can do the same.
Awesome. Lots of golden nuggets in there, and really sharing that personal experience. Somebody who's trained and has that background, that they are able to see that they also need some support. So thank you for that. I'm going to move this question over to Autumn. The next question: what are the long-term effects of generational trauma that you encounter in your role, and how do these issues present themselves in our Indigenous populations today?
I think what we see a lot is that, the conversation starts with talking about generational trauma, but today I'm really trying to show folks that, like, it intersects with all of the issues that we experience today, right? Like, it's not like generational trauma is just a thing that we have to deal with and the effects of colonialism, but it's also like the high health disparities, our issues with mental health, our issues with, living in like structural conditions as a result of colonialism that have not great supports for our communities, right? And so I think like these issues really are exacerbated by generational trauma, right? So instead of it being like, struggling with your mental health alone is enough, but then like having the like weight of knowing about like what happened to your people and what happened to your ancestors, or again, yeah, like the grief that, we were talking about, with wondering like what could have been, what knowledges have gone to sleep that we are still trying to revitalize. Like that can be, feeling overwhelming at times, I think, in conjunction with everything else. But it's also potentially a path to liberation. Like it can take us away from that individualized shame and blame and help us to see like, my people survived a lot of things. And like, while we might have like, had some setbacks, where there is a lot of revitalization work happening, and folks connecting back to their cultures, learning our traditional languages, learning traditional practices and just ways of being in the world, right? And I think, for my own personal healing journey, like I had a similar experience of like learning about, everything that happened and how, society continues to perpetuate colonialism today. It's like enraging, right? It really, it really bothered me. And so I had to do a lot of like healing work around that, but also in conjunction with contemporary traumas that I was experiencing. So I'm a survivor of sexual violence, and that was one of the biggest things to overcome, but also learning how widespread it is against Indigenous women. It really makes me like, it took the kind of blame off of me about like, undoing the sort of shame that happens when experiencing trauma, but also seeing that like, this is a larger issue that needs to be addressed, right? And so it's not just me, and I'm not just a statistic. And so I think these sort of like long-term effects is like, we have to start like I love the quote that says like, it ran in your family till it ran into you. And so it's like, we are doing the work that like my kids won't have to do this work, right? Like I'm interrupting these cycles of trauma now, and like it's taking me forever, right, to do healing work. And yeah, and the world keeps turning as I'm trying to work on these things. But it's like, I'm trying to make things better for the next generation of folks too, so that they will have, better opportunities to just thrive and, live happy and full lives. And so that's why I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that insight. Glenna, same question. What are those long-term effects of generational trauma?
Yeah, well, many of them have been shared, but I just kind of want to highlight the loss of culture and self-esteem and um, mental health issues, substance use disorders, and suicide, and parenting challenges sometimes. And so I think the long-term effects are there, and they've been there for generations. And now it seems like we're really trying to stop those cycles and do a lot of the healing work so it looks different for our children. And one thing I want to share on is I'm the first person of my generation and my family that didn't have the boarding school experience. So my father did and his parents did. And one thing from like generational trauma that kind of comes to mind is growing up, my parents got divorced, so I was pretty young when they got divorced, so I don't really remember a whole lot of them being together. But throughout my childhood and my relationship with my dad, it was always kind of a certain way. And I didn't really fully understand that until I got into psychology and could really start learning about these things. But his parenting was impacted by the boarding schools. He wasn't with his family. And now I have my own child. And gosh, I mean, I just couldn't even imagine not being with her and being separated from her. And so as I got older, I could kind of understand there's not anything wrong with me. There's not really anything wrong with my father. It's just these are some of those long-term impacts of generational trauma. And the same thing, with my grandparents. Both of my grandparents were fluent Kiowa speakers. And that was something, growing up, and I could hear them speak our language. And I remember in high school, I was so excited because we had an opportunity to learn Kiowa language. And I remember going to their house after school, just thrilled to tell them this great news. And, their reaction or their response was a lot different than I anticipated. But that was before I knew about, this generational trauma. But they're really concerned. I remember my grandpa saying, well, are you sure that's a good idea? Right. They're not here, unfortunately, but I think if they were, it would be wonderful for them just to see how, our languages are being revitalized, and we're reclaiming our culture, we're reclaiming our worth. And so I think that, if they were here, then they could definitely benefit from some of that healing, so I think it's like, the generational trauma, the long-term effects have been profound. But what I think is awesome is that now we're all in a place where we're learning to heal and to grow and reclaim. And we're really, instead of kind of staying in that Western, deficit kind of perspective, we're all trying to live a more abundant life. And, I love the term native brilliance, because I feel like for a lot of our communities, we've kind of forgotten that, right? Because there's been a lot of systems in place that have stripped that from us. And I just think it's so like special that now we're living in a time where, we can say that and we can feel that. And, our little ones won't have to go through as much as, our parents, our grandparents, what we went through, because we're making it better for them. And so, so even though, the long-term effects are profound, the healing is greater.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. The healing is greater. Thank you for that. And you touched a little bit on this question, so I'm going to direct the next question to the other panelists. In what ways have you seen traditional healing centered and integrated into today's mental health and wellness conversations and reality? And I'll start with Autumn for that question.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of greatest joys that I like to, share is that like our culture like is the intervention, like our culture is the treatment. And I really like have received a lot of pushback from like Western scientists. They're like, culture can't be a treatment, right? Like how can that be? And it's like, looks like you need to connect back to your culture. Like, so I think just like every aspect of like being in community and knowing who you are, like that is the greatest buffer, protector, like setting you off on the right path, right? Like thinking about pairing, our native youth with elders and getting to learn and just sit and listen to stories. Like that's a huge privilege, right? Getting to attend ceremonial events and learn, or even just participate in like intertribal kind of opportunities. I love those sorts of things. And so, just seeing that folks are connecting back to their communities and like building up our community power again, I think is like one of the biggest things that I've seen, that like it's not a specific modality that you need to be trained in. It can be across disciplines. So I'm in the social work field, but there's a lot of, healthcare, mental health providers, and it's not just, discipline specific, right? So it's like psychologists and clinical folks and, emergency room providers, right? Like some of their like folks that are in the emergency room are the first line of folks that will actually have some sort of mental health conversation, right? So even just them knowing about like Indigenous worldviews and how we are like relationally based, right? That could be a huge intervention instead of, something super, prescriptive or like, follow these 18 steps over, the next 9 weeks. So I think what I've just really seen is that you can really take any aspect of our culture, like language or learning songs, participating in ceremonies, or just, the way of being, really. Like I think that's one of the biggest things that it's folks don't think of it as an intervention, but just like getting to spend time with my aunties and just to heal, like that is so restorative to me. Or like spaces like this today where you're like with folks that you don't have to like translate yourself for, right? And that just like being your full self, like that's healing to me. And so all of these things that we can do to really support folks being their full selves, not having to translate ourselves for whiteness, and just to again be a full person. I think that's a totally different way that we think about mental health. We're not like, okay, I'm gonna check this box of my mental well-being and then move on. It's like, no, like how is your like spirit, how is your soul, how are you moving through the world? And that is healing to me.
Mm-hmm.
That was so beautifully put. I mean, my takeaway, the golden nugget for me in that, what you shared is our culture is the treatment. There's a lot to that. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And Monique, same question about traditional healing and in today's mental health and wellness conversations.
Yeah, so just kind of piggybacking off of what Dr. BlackDeer shared, is it's really centering culture as the main modality or the main way in which we are supporting mental health and wellness. And then the other modalities, some that might be Western, some that are not, different modalities that can be brought in to support that. So, in the work that I do with my clients, it oftentimes starts off with just stories. It's sharing stories, it's being together, and both in both ways. So it's more a reciprocal experience versus me having a clipboard with a bunch of questions, right? It's share about who you are, who's your family, and I learn a lot about them, and we kind of like have this conversation together. And in that, I'm still listening very, very closely. I'm listening to different patterns. I'm listening to things that like, oh, where might be some challenging areas that we're going to need to focus on in our treatment. But in that, I'm also hearing a lot of Indigenous brilliance. I'm hearing the relationships that they have, the connections, who's important to them, what do they already incorporate into their healing practices that they may not realize as part of their healing practices, but just a way of being. Because a lot of times our community members are already doing so many phenomenal things, but they're not identifying it as like a healing and wellness modality for themselves. They just like, this is what I do. I wake up and I pray. Well, that's great. And you can continue to do that. And we want you to continue to do that. So, it's important to uplift that, to center that, to also share how these things are already being so much like incorporated and done, versus the opposite of like, let me tell you what all the things that you should be doing instead. That prescriptive kind of approach I don't feel like it works, and it's not the way in which I practice or my team practices. And in that, we can learn more about someone's culture, maybe areas of reconnection that they're desiring or needing. Me being in Los Angeles, and there's a lot of folks in LA County in particular who their homelands are not in LA. So their treatment plan includes them revisiting home. It includes that, they're going to go to the next ceremony. They're going to contact their auntie and see what that process would be like. That is actually what treatment in, a non-Western way and an indigenized approach would look like. And it feels like you're in a lot of ways in space with relatives. That's how I do see my clients as relatives, and that I have a responsibility to support them in where they want to go and what is wellness for them. And then I also have that training around diagnosis, where I do sometimes see that where the treatment might need to be more focused on the diagnosis a bit, but still it always centers culture in that. Sometimes there's there are folks who might have, like myself, I had shared around the postpartum depression and anxiety, and part of my own treatment, it wasn't necessarily what my therapist told me to do, but I already for myself knew I see her. But also one of my things that I need to attend the next community event. I need to be in community again, because I was in depression, you oftentimes isolate and don't want to go out. So I'm like, I know I need to go to a community event. And luckily there was plenty that were being offered. And so that, you go into that. So this is one of the things that is important, is that we are encouraging that where it's fitting for the community members as they're working through their wellness.
Yeah, great, thanks. So next up, we've got a couple of questions coming from Ruby, today's Native Youth Grantmaker, the junior moderator here with me. Welcome, Ruby. You got the next two questions.
Awesome. Aiki, everyone. It's good to be here. So my question for you guys is, can you speak to intersectional identities and how this has affected your individual approach or practices? I will start with Dr. Black.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I identify as indigiqueer, so I'm both indigenous and queer. And so the combination of the two are kind of like inseparable for me. Like I can't see the world from one and then turn on the other. So yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times, being queer and being indigenous is kind of like, they want us to feel like a minority of a minority, right? And it's like, that's not actually the case, right? So the way that I just approach my work and, doing things from this indigiqueer lens is like, I'm always seeking to like uplift that, Native excellence or indigenous brilliance that we've been talking about, but also, using queerness and queer theory as a way to sort of like subvert the paradigm, right? So I think these two go hand in hand, right? Or about, all of our like decolonizing work, right? It's often like showing folks that there is another way to do things, to think about things, a different way to be in the world. And so rather than trying to like, I think a lot of folks think that like decolonizing is like, just talking negative about, current situations. But I'm like, no, it's like a generative, like it's an expansive framework. And so I really approach, all of my work through this perspective of like trying to show that there are other, beautiful, huge possibilities that we can, create or, return to, right, for our, traditional ways of knowing and being.
That was a great response. Now I will go to Monique, and you can speak on intersectional identities and how that has affected your individual approach or practice.
Yeah, so I have a lot of different identities, and I feel like each one, I mean, because it's fluid, right? As we move through our life, and we also get new identities. As I'm a newer mom, right? My son is now 2 years old, and before that, I was an auntie who had custody of her niece. So I had like a a a family structure that might be different than others. I also am a bonus mom, right? I have a stepdaughter. I'm in a, I have just so many different identities that I'm thinking of. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter. Like there's all these different things, and in every experience and all of my identities, it really does enhance my ability to how I support the community, how I support my clients, and how I just see the world. So I really do see it as like a superpower. Each of our intersecting identities, it really just adds to so much, and it's through experience. Like it's my lived experience, and from that I'm able to support folks from a whole different lens each and every day. And so it's been a really beautiful process, right? Before I'm like, well, I don't think I used to only identify in one way. And some, when I was younger, and as I gotten older, I'm like, oh no, like I have so much more to offer from all these different lenses and experiences. And I am one person, and this is my experience, and also a lens, a great support to how I work in community. Because a lot of us do have many identities and many roles. And so it's sometimes I can really like lean into a part of my identity more intentionally that can be really supportive to who I'm working with.
Yeah, that was great. I do think, identity is so important. And as you said, there's many different identities. And as Dr. BlackDeer was also mentioning, sometimes those identities, you can't really separate them. Certain spaces you can. So yeah, I will go over to Dr. Glenna.
Thank you. Some really great things have been shared, and I'm in agreement with all of those things. I think as I'm aware of all the identities and roles that I have and how they intersect, that helps me have that awareness, when I'm helping clients or families or community or whatever the case may be. But and it's been mentioned, but one thing that I also kind of want to highlight here is from a Western approach, oftentimes our identities, like, you're the minority, or, this is supposed to be a deficit. And in my experience, a lot of the people that see me, they often come with that, it's like, well, I have these intersecting identities, and, they go against me. And it's like, well, from that, colonial Western system, that might be the case, but in reality, it is an enhancement, a positive, a strength. And so that's one of my favorite things I think that I get to do with people is trying to help them figure out how to kind of change the lens and see it as a strength. Like every day, like, you'll see some of those things on social media that's like, it's a good day to be Indigenous, and every day it is, and every day I wake up and I'm so thankful, that I'm Kiowa. Out of all my identities, that's where it starts for me. And I believe that, despite our struggles, despite, that I'm married to a white guy, but he's an ally. He's a very big ally, and he's actually learning Kiowa ways. So I'm very, very fortunate and happy about that. But like we go places, and his experience in the world is much different than mine, right? But yet, I'm still every day thankful to be Kiowa, and glad Creator helped me be this way. So, I think that's the biggest thing, is just starting to respect everybody's identities, and to see how, it creates abundance in your life, and it's not a negative, despite what might be going on in the world, politically or socially. Just figuring out how you can use that, to heal and grow and move forward in a good way in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was great. I love that you emphasized on abundance, because I think depending on your identities and how intersectional they can be, your communities can be so vital to who you are. So then I will go to my next question. A portion of NAP's audience are fellow Indigenous youth and scholars. Many of them are amidst emotional times of stress, change, and maybe feeling overwhelmed. Is there anything that you might say to them, or advice and guidance that you'd care to pass along? And I can start again with Dr. BlackDeer.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts. I think, one of the biggest things that I've been like learning and struggling with in my own life is like letting people show up for me. Like, I think we are like, hyper independence is a trauma response, and it's, kind of a normalized coping skill, right? Like, I'll just, forget it. I'll do it myself. I don't need anybody. And, I recently, my partner and I became instant aunties to 3 little kids, my partner's nieces and nephews. So we became parents of 3 kids, all under the age of 10 overnight. And yeah, it's been the past like 7 months of just like, I had never changed a diaper before, and I don't, like, I don't know what is happening. And so, yeah, I think folks were like, you kind of feel like you're like postpartum as well, because you're like there, but you're not fully there, but you want to be, part of it, but you're, looking like you're like looking through the glass. And so, for me, I was like, I'm great. I'm totally cool, and like, I think that's really common that we're supposed to like tell people, nah, I'm good. I'm great. And so one of my friends that's like really been here for me throughout all of this, she's like, okay, but really, how are you? Like really what's going on? And so I think like having those folks that you can go to whenever you are like at your lowest, or like just like feeling like you can't go on another day, like that's what you need to do. And actually like letting people show up for you is the hardest thing. Like it really is hard. And I also think too, like setting up your life to be a supportive environment, right? So it's not like, oh, like there's always folks who'll say like, just call me if you need anything or whatever. But like setting up like whenever I get really bad, like whenever things are really struggling for me, I'll tell, like I have my, support system, my 2 best friends, and they're like, okay, I'm going to call every other day. And if I don't hear from you by this day, then I'll call, because it's like, yeah, when you get in the depths of like depression and anxiety and just overwhelming, like it can feel paralyzing. And you're like, I don't even have capacity to reach out to anybody right now. Like I can't even get out of bed. So I think like normalizing those sorts of conversations for folks in your support network and building that sort of like infrastructure about like, this is what my daily life looks like. Like my partner is like, do you have capacity to talk about this right now? And I'm like, oh, we've grown so much, right? Because she used to be like, blah, and I'm just like, I can't, I have nothing, right? And then, with kids, they don't like ask if you have capacity. They're like, this needs batteries so that the bubble machine will work. And like, they took my turn, right? And so it's just like, you have to set up supports and like really build your life to be supportive, right? That way you're not like, let me just, sister soldier on and just push through, and then I'll burn out, and then I'll, be out for a while, and then I'll somewhat recover and come back and do it all again, right? So I really had to like interrupt that pattern for me and be like, I can't like start saying no to stuff, start saying no to people or places or environments that like don't sit well with your spirit, and build up your, your supportive, loving environment, because you deserve to be held and cared and cherished, right? And so you shouldn't have to like pack yourself into these tiny little boxes to survive, right? You deserve to thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I love the way you put that. You deserve to thrive. I'm the oldest daughter out of seven siblings, and just being away at school and everything, I think I've also had the tendency to be, hyper independent. But in the last year, I myself has also, move towards like making space and community and having people, reach out in times that I need. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And now we can go to Monique.
Oh my goodness, so much that I resonated with what was shared already. And something I also want to kind of dive a little bit more on or deeper into is do less. We are doing way too much. Everyone's doing too much all the time. Hyper independence, putting on too many things into our calendar, squeezing in things, not enough breaks, right? I just see it day in and day out. I've experienced it myself. And so we're seeing a lot of burnout. Our young folks the same, right? Like needing to do the next thing. So I want us to think about our health, our wellness, and our lives as like a journey and not like the next thing needs to happen right away. For many of us, because of generational trauma, we oftentimes will find ourselves doing way too much, trying to do it really quickly. We don't have enough time. And that might have been the case before. And I think that, sure, there might be some things now that we have to consider, but we have to really look at the full picture around like, is this sustainable? Because I see too many folks just burning out, getting really sick in the process, young people just like overwhelmed. And it happens because we are not, one, saying no enough. We don't have healthy boundaries. So really creating those healthy boundaries and having a wellness team. So similar to what Dr. BlackDeer had shared is like, who are you surrounding yourself with? Who and what are the things that you personally need in your life to thrive? Every one of us is different. What supports me might not support the next person, and that is totally okay. But we do have to be mindful of where our energy is at and our capacity. And there's so many things to consider. It can be the season of our life. It can be the season of the year, right? I'm most energized in the spring and the summer, but my energy really goes down in the fall and the winter. Many of us do. So what I put on my plate for work or otherwise is going to look different, and it should look different at different times of the year. So we have to pay attention to, our environments, the times of our life, the situations, and like things that we're experiencing. I shared earlier about my postpartum journey with my son. And yeah, that was my 120% focus is my son and my mental health and wellness at that time. Nothing else mattered. And I didn't have capacity for anything else, not a text message, not a phone call, nothing, right? I'm in a different place now. And in this, I'm also mindful though, like not doing too much. So I just really want to like uplift that around like when we think of our wellness is like, what do you have capacity for, and saying no. And it's okay to say no. Sometimes it's not now. Sometimes it's just not ever. It's the fact that we have the ability to decide on what is going to work for us. And we have to really push sometimes that feeling of guilt. It will come up, but it will also subside. So if it comes up, acknowledge it. Okay, I feel kind of sad about that. I really want to do that, but also it's not good for me right now, or this is not something that I want to do. So checking in with ourselves, especially youth who are very ambitious, and I love it. And also, I want you all to sustain for a long time. I want us to live long, prosperous lives in a well way, right? So that's my 2 cents there.
No, yeah. And I think that's important. Also speaking on like the different seasons of your life and what capacity you have, because it ebbs and flows. And sometimes you have more capacity for certain things. And I think, yeah, learning my own capacity during undergrad it shifted over time. So now I will move to Dr. Glenna. Is there anything you might say or advice and guidance you'd care to pass along to the Indigenous youth in the audience?
Absolutely. And, I echo on everything that's been shared, and I like the do less motto, because sometimes when you learn to say no to things that really aren't for you, that actually is allowing you to say yes in some areas that are. The other thing I would just say is to, slow down, breathe. I appreciate what was shared was like, it's a journey, right? Like, we have time, take your time, kind of enjoy where you're at, enjoy the moment. I'd also just to add something a little different, we are living in times that are super stressful, super uncertain. And so we kind of need to be certain of some things, which is really hard right now. So one thing that's really comforting to me that I think about a lot, and I would like to share this with our youth, is, well, there's actually two things. But the one thing is, every day, no matter what's going on in my day or my life or in the world, I know we're not great to our planet, but you can count on that there's going to be, the sun's going to set and the sun's going to rise. And that's going to happen every day. So no matter how chaotic things are or stressful, those things are guaranteed. And so, no matter how today goes, I get another chance tomorrow, So I really like to kind of be aware of some of those things that are for certain. And then the last thing is, this was shared when I was finishing graduate school. I almost quit because, those systems weren't really made for us, right? And it was really challenging. But one of my good friends, reminded me of the strength and endurance of my ancestors. And, he said, hey, your ancestors survive so you could be here today. And so basically if they could do that, you can do this. And I hope you've all seen that episode of Reservation Dogs where she's surrounded by all of her ancestors, and I visualize that a lot, just so I know, no matter what's going on wherever I go, I'm not there alone. I have Creator, I have all my ancestors there with me, and that is really comforting. And so I would say to our youth, definitely don't forget that.
Yeah, I think that is so important. On the tougher days I also, remind myself that I do have my ancestors. I have my gram, she was the first in our family to go to college. She commuted from Sacramento to go to UC Davis. She did it amidst going through a divorce. She had 3 kids. So, like reminding myself of that and her strength, it's like, these times in undergrad do seem a little bit more like manageable. I appreciate all your guys' inputs, and I definitely will be taking that advice myself. I will like to welcome Stephanie back to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Ruby. Thanks for stepping in, doing an incredibly powerful job once again. Thank you so much for co-moderating with me. I appreciate that. The next question I'd like to ask is, I think it's important that we understand like what resources are out there. So what resources are you all familiar with that you want to ensure our general audience knows about? And I'll start with Monique on that.
So, of course, I'm going to promote Indigenous Circle of Wellness in California, since we do provide services throughout the state virtually, as well as we have 2 offices in Southern California. So mental health services we do partnerships with tribes and organizations, as well as take some insurances and also private pay. So that's one option. And that's, I think important just to know that there are Native therapists that have practices that are providing services to our community. And the other resources that I would like to share is that there are some really great directories out there that have Native therapists and providers. So if you're looking for therapy, is to find who's a good fit for you. Whether or not they are Native, I think it's just important to find a good fit for you in the therapist. One directory that I really wanted to share is Inclusive Therapist. It is, you can search throughout the country of different providers with different backgrounds, and they really do come from like a decolonial approach, all the providers on that directory. So I highly recommend checking them out. The other is that, reach out. I mean, you all hopefully feel comfortable enough to reach out to us. And I know personally, I'd be more than willing to connect folks depending on what region you're in, or help you even just answer some questions. A lot of the time when it comes to mental health, it's we talked about it earlier around the shame, the fear, not knowing what questions to ask, might be your first time. So myself and our team are always available, whether or not you're seeking services from us, to ask those questions, to get more familiar with the process. We want to be here to support folks near and far. And I think from like larger community, as far as organizations and also tribes, is hire Native therapists and wellness providers to come in to the spaces, build those relationships. There's so many ways to do that, whether it's workshops and trainings, just talking about it. The more we talk about mental health and wellness, the more our community will feel comfortable in accessing services and the various types of services that are available. Because just like the wellness approach is not a one size fits all, neither is the type of provider or what access that you need or what resource you need personally. We're all different. We all have different needs and what works best for us. So it's important for us to just like see what's out there and there's so many different opportunities for wellness. So that's what I'd like to share.
Yeah, thank you. Autumn, like, what resources did you want to share?
Well, I'm a social worker, so like our whole lives are resources. I'm like, I can connect you to folks. So always have resources on hand. I think for folks who have intersecting issues of like dating violence or trauma, the Native helpline, the Strong Hearts Native helpline, it's 1-844-7-NATIVE. That's like a 24/7 hour resource. You can call them. They have a website at Strong Hearts Helpline, and they have like a escape key really quick, if you're like in a potentially dangerous situation, that it'll like go to like a grocery shopping page or something. That's a good one for folks that might be experiencing mental health issues related to that. I work a lot with Native youth, and so a lot of my resources are youth oriented. So the Native Youth Sexual Health Network, I think they're based up in Canada. They have some toolkits that youth can download and kind of, work on reclaiming their identities, getting connected back to culture, having sexual health education. That is a really great support for mental health. And then here in the sort of Northern Plains area, Indian Health Board, they have a program called We Are Native, like R, the letter R. And it used to be called Ask Auntie, but it's called like Ask Your Relatives now. And folks can like submit a question and like get support that way. And you can look at other questions that they've answered in the past. And I think that's a really great way. And they also have a text message service that you can sign up for too. And you get a thing like every Friday at 4. And it's like a wellness tip or, something like, how do you do this? What does that look like in your community? And so I think a lot of like resources have been through like social media and online, and having folks feel like they are connected and can learn more from, folks across the country. So yeah, I think those are my resources that I want to share.
Yeah, I recognize a lot of those great tips there, great resources. Glenna, what resources would you want to direct people to?
Sure. Well, a huge one is 988. That's our mental health crisis line. Back in September of last year, it celebrated its first year, and still the statistics are only 1 out of 5 people know about that line. And so we need 5 out of 5. We need everybody to know that that's a resource because it's a lifesaver. So I really want to highlight 988. Also, if you're in Oklahoma, there's a group I'm a part of. It's called Matriarch. It was founded by Sarah Adams and Kendra Wilson Clements, and it's just a great organization for women and Two-Spirit people. And basically, we come together, we're relearning our culture, we're healing together, and we're healing our families and our community. So if you're in Oklahoma, right now we have a chapter in Oklahoma City and in Tulsa, and they're ending their year right now. So sometime in the summer, or actually it'll be in the spring, I think. So they'll have applications you could submit and hopefully be a part of that. But it's a wonderful resource. And, if you're in Oklahoma, that's something specific to Oklahoma, but definitely Google that and check that out.
Awesome. Yeah, you all have shared some great resources. Thank you so much. So in the final question, I'm going to combine a couple of these questions is we do have philanthropy impacting this field in a positive way. What are some closing words you might share with our audience, from funders and Native nonprofits to elected officials and future leaders? What is something that you want to leave them with, having a better understanding or response to? What is your final word on that? And I'll start with Autumn.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is like, we don't have to replicate systems that are predominant without, throughout the country. And so I think a lot of times folks think like decolonizing or whatever we're doing is like, well, if it's an indigenous person doing capitalism, then it's decolonized. But it's like, no, like there are other ways of doing this. So I think like the services that you provide for your employees, the culture that you are establishing in your workplaces, the kind of like way that you are leading the world and the conversation, it really doesn't have to be, based off of something that doesn't apply to us or doesn't really translate, right? So like a lot of these sort of terms and ideas about like Western mental health don't translate into our languages, and they don't have corollaries to like our ways of being. And so I think we really have to like, we need folks to kind of step up and be those leaders to say like, we are interested in, funding things that are culturally driven and not, just another sort of Western Band-Aid, right? Like we need to do things that are creating these sorts of cultures and like environments of support that we want to see throughout, every aspect of what your funding touches, right? So just really thinking holistically about how you're fostering room for folks to thrive and how you're pushing that forward, and kind of resisting that deficit narrative of like, they need us to come help them, right? Like we're, going from that thrive mindset. And I think that's what I want folks to take home.
Thank you. Glenna, what's your call to action? Final words of encouragement?
Well, we are in a mental health crisis, so we still need programs, we need support, we need funding. There's multiple ways of doing that. I want to mention the arts. I haven't really got to share a lot on that, but a lot of us can heal through the arts. Research has shown, that it's effective, and as people, we're very artistic. And so, we need funding for those programs, funding for our youth and, populations that are vulnerable and in need right now. And then this is a saying that, in all my trainings throughout Indian country, nothing about us without us, right? And so when developing these programs, we need to be included in the table. We need our young people included. They are not our future leaders, they're our leaders already right now. And so definitely funds for those programs, and, be sure that we're included in those conversations.
Thank you. Monique, call to action, closing remarks?
Yeah, well, definitely everything that has already been shared. I think like the thread here is like that our voices, our experiences, and the ways in which we know how to heal are centered, and that it's not just we're the ones doing the programming, but we're at the very beginning of like, what does that look like? And we get to decide on the healing and the supports that we're needing. I think oftentimes if we go from a Western approach, it's told to us, so you have to do it. This is the grant guidelines. This is how it's done. These are the outcomes, but our outcomes and what that looks like might be very different. It is very different. So really to come from a re-indigenized approach to it, centering that, as we talked about earlier, how essential that is to our wellness, is to have that at the forefront. And then if we choose to bring in other modalities that are Western, then that can be an add-on versus the opposite, the other way around. So really centering culture, our traditional knowledge systems and ancestral wisdom and how, what is funded, and that it's absolutely continuously needed in all areas, not only for the services that are offered, but the actual people providing the services and the resources to communities. So the leadership, right, of organizations, the staff, that they're also included in that, in consideration of it, because I think that's another area where we see a lot of burnout, is that folks are working, doing all this great, amazing work at the same time at their own health and wellness. So we have to really be holistic in that as well, as like through entire seeing it all, like we're all community, we're all part of this ecosystem, and how is everyone being cared for. So that can be funding or funds that are for like fringe benefits, and other supports in supporting like team infrastructure and wellness as well. So just the way that we see and do work, really look like, what is that centering of it? What does it look like to have really that indigenized approach and those core values?
Awesome. Glenna, Autumn, Monique, so much Indigenous brilliance that you shared with us. I got so caught up in all the great information you shared. I didn't even do a call to the audience to ask questions in the chat. But I learned so much. Thank you for spending the time with us, illuminating some resources, some ways to reach out. You just appreciate each of you. And Ruby, thanks for stepping in and helping to co-moderate. At this point, I will turn it over to Amanda. Thank you.
Amanda, I think your microphone is off.
I want to thank our moderator, our panelists, and Ruby from our Native Youth Grantmakers. It is a beautiful thing to be Indigenous. We also just want to thank all of our members and audience. We appreciate your continued support in our ongoing programming, and in particular, your support for our member education sessions. I hope today you walk away with some important insights around mental health. Honor yourselves by honoring your feelings. Everything you feel, your exhaustion from parenting, your disappointment of family trauma, your joy in the midst of it all, it is all valid. You get to feel it all deeply, and you get to feel it in community. You are not alone. You have a deeply rooted support system of ancestors of all kinds walking with you to hold space for you and to validate where you are right now. I hope you leave with the understanding of caring for your spirit is an everyday practice. Find practices that are sustainable for your journey. There are so many. They can be prayer, they can be ceremony, walking, listening to music, dancing, creating, loving, reading. Lastly, just that mental health topics can be triggering. So please be compassionate with yourself today. If you need time to transition into your day, please take it. You do not have to earn rest. You are worthy of being whole, which means you are also worthy to slow down and prioritize yourself when you need to. There is nothing more productive than taking care of your emotional and spiritual well-being. As a reminder, this session was open to the public as a highlight of our member benefits. NAP membership is open to Indigenous relatives and non-Indigenous allies. If you're not a NAP member yet and want to learn more, please visit our newly redesigned website at nativephilanthropy.org, or you can reach out to Raina at ourday@nativephilanthropy.org. Lastly, you should be receiving an email with a link to a short survey. Please take a few moments to share your opinions and what you'd like to see about what you'd like to see this session and future. It should take no longer than 5 to 6 minutes to complete. and provides invaluable feedback for our team. Our team has been hard at work at getting some amazing programs put together for you over the next few months. So please make a point to join us and carve out space to prioritize conversations just like this. Our next one will be celebrating Juneteenth. Join us the day before the holiday on June 18th for Regarding Reparations, a conversation on Indigenous and Black reparations, movements, and philanthropy's role. Thank you once again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.